government alone. And the government, of course, made a profit, because when it distributed the coins, it distributed them in return for slightly more than the coins were worth. And that's called a profit which is made on the monopoly of coinage. Also, they discovered that in order to prevent the shaving of coins, because what people would do would be to take a coin and shave the outside and the round outside of it, and then melt down the resulting gold or silver and use it for their own purposes, that governments began to put striations on the coins, which again, if you look at your coins above the penny and the nickel, you will find that this is the case with the U.S. coinage at the present time, even though it would not occur to anyone to shave these coins because they are all made with base metals. They are no longer made with gold and silver. So there's no point in shaving them, but even so, we continue to put striations on the edges of them to prevent shaving, which of course doesn't take place any longer. What was the situation prior to the invention of money? Well, the system was called barter. I offer you my apple for your pear, to take the example of last week. I offer you 2 pots for one farm implement, let's say, or a hammer or a sword. You offer me a chicken in return for some kind of service that I'm going to provide you. This was done for many, many centuries, even though it's an extremely inefficient way of exchange. Why? Because there is no common measure of value. How many chickens does it take to get a certain service? 1 chicken? 2 chickens? Also, you can't subdivide in many cases. What do you want, a leg? Do you want a wing? Do you want half a chicken? And so on. I mean, once you've sawed the chicken in half, it's not much use anymore as a live chicken. Do you want 1 pot and for your hammer that you've made? Or do you want 2 pots? Oh, I see, you want 3 pots. Well, okay, I'll agree to pay you 3 pots. But what kind? With handles, without handles, with decoration, without decoration, what size? It's an extremely inefficient method of exchange. Nevertheless, the method was used for centuries until the invention of money, as I say, in the 7th century BCE, which didn't spread around the world immediately. I mean, it took hundreds of years before it became generalized. Money is a much better way of providing for exchange. Why? Because it is a common element. A chicken, a live chicken, in a particular country, in a particular region, will go for, I don't know, $50, let's say. So, I pay you the $50, you have the dollars, I have the chicken. Okay. Then you can use that $50 to buy anything you want. You don't have to take a pot. Or you don't have to accept a haircut in return for the chicken. So it is a medium of exchange. Before that, in the barter, there was no medium of exchange. Money is a medium of exchange. And as such, it is extremely convenient. Now, money was also a store of value. That is, money was something that you could accumulate. There was no point in accumulating pots. There was no point in accumulating chickens. Because how many pots could you possibly use? How many chickens do you want? I mean, if you need pots, you're going to have to give up chickens. So you're not going to be able to hoard chickens. You're not going to be able to hoard pots. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You can hoard money. It is in principle a store of value. And this is another advantage to gold in the fact that it doesn't tarnish, and therefore it is a store of value that doesn't change in quality unless it is diluted. You can add other metals to gold. It will still look like gold, but it will in fact not weigh the same as pure gold, and therefore it's easy to determine that the gold has been adulterated. So, basically, for centuries, people used coins. And the earliest generalized monetary system was that of the Roman Empire. Its currency was called the denarius. It was a silver-based currency. And the term denarius still exists in many countries of the world where the currency is called the dinar or something similar. And these silver coins are found all over the place, including in China, because there was a brisk trade between the Roman Empire and China, even though it was extremely far away, in which mostly the Chinese took the silver and they sold the Romans silk, which the Romans didn't know how to make. Well, the emperor decided that in the end of the 3rd century that this was Diocletian, who did two very modern things. He imposed price controls, which led to shortages on all kinds of staple commodities, number one. Number two, he adulterated the silver coinage by adding other base metals to it. Now, what does this mean? What that created was inflation, and we will discuss inflation in a moment as a monetary phenomenon. The subsequent emperor, Constantine, eliminated the price controls, issued a new coinage, which, with a keen sense of public relations, he called the solidus, which of course means solid. And it was a gold coin. And people accepted it because it eliminated inflation overnight. It eliminated inflation completely. And again, it was gold, and people like gold because it doesn't tarnish and it keeps its value, and so on and so forth. So that became the international currency for many centuries thereafter. Even after the Western Roman Empire collapsed, the Eastern Roman Empire, which eventually became the Byzantine Empire, continued to issue this coin, which retained its weight and value for 700 years. That is by far the longest time that any international coinage has been accepted internationally as being the standard of the world. And again, the Byzantines didn't call it the Byzant. Other people call it the Byzant, but the coin, which was called the Byzant, and which retained its value for 700 years, is found still in excavations in all from Europe to China and every place in between, because it was used as the international coin, the international money, if you like. Okay. The next development in money as a medium of exchange we owe to the Chinese, who invented paper money. This is something that we would, all of us, be much happier had the Chinese not invented, but of course, if they hadn't invented it, somebody else would have. At any rate, now most countries base their currency on printed paper. Until recently, most exchanges were done by paper means, either actual bills or checks, which of course is an order to a bank to pay somebody a certain amount of money. The problem with this is that since the value of a paper currency is simply the word of the government that issues it, that it's not going to debase the currency. If it does debase the currency, there's nothing that you can do about it except to overthrow that government or turn them out of office if it's a democratic government, and demand that they stop debasing the currency. Getting back then to the various currencies that have been the currencies of the world, following the decline of the Byzantine Empire, the Venetian ducat, which was both a silver and a gold coin, became the international currency. And after the defeat of the Venetians by the Spanish coinage of various kinds was the international currency based on huge finds of gold and silver in the Western Hemisphere after Spain conquered much of the Western Hemisphere, particularly those areas that produced gold and silver. The earliest coinage of the United States, the earliest money that was used by the people of the United States was Spanish coins. The pieces of 8, the famous pieces of 8 of Treasure Island, was a Spanish coin cut into pieces of 8 pieces. A quarter. When we talk about a quarter, originally the quarter was a quarter of a Spanish coin, which people cut into pieces in order to have smaller coins which they could use for smaller purchases, and so on. So that went on until Spain declined, and the British took over and as the great trading power of the world and naval power of the world, and the pound sterling became the international currency. Now, the pound was called the pound sterling because it was based on a certain weight of sterling silver. At any rate, it was the international currency until the 20th century, when after the First World War, it was replaced gradually by the U.S. dollar, which was the international currency and remains the international currency until today, although the fact that the United States has been busily depreciating its currency, has created a good deal of unhappiness in the world, and countries have tried to diversify their reserves by buying Swiss francs or British pounds or Japanese yen or gold. Now, until recently, they bought euros, but now that the euro is under attack, it's very hard to know what to put your money into. So, in effect, countries, as well as individuals, are going back, it's very interesting, going back to gold. And the reason why gold has soared in value in recent times is partially due to the fear factor because of the financial crisis we've been going through since 2008. But it's also due to the fact that countries have been buying gold with their dollar reserves because they believe that the gold is a better store of value, and this going in relationship to paper money such as the dollar is going to increase in value. Many organizations and many individuals have come to the same conclusion. So let's pause now and discuss the concept of inflation. A famous American economist named Milton Friedman said, among many other things, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. People don't think of it that way. I mean, he was right, but people don't think of it that way. People think of inflation as an increase in the price of things that you buy. But that begs the question of why is the price increasing? Well, if it's a single particular commodity, it may be because of a natural disaster in the areas which produce that commodity. Or it may be because a factory that makes that product burned up. In other words, it may be a shortage created by some factor which affects the price of that particular commodity, that thing. But if there's a generalized increase in prices, it's due to the fact that the currency is being debased by the government that issues it. Let me explain. You have a country which is isolated. It's all by itself. It's an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It doesn't trade with anybody else, but it has an economy. A certain quantity of goods and services are produced in that economy every year. And the government of that island issues coins or pieces of paper. It doesn't really make any difference in this case. Pieces of paper it issues 1 million pesos. Let's call them pesos. It issues 1 million pesos. So the value of the goods and services that are produced in that economy are valued in pesos. A particular thing that people buy costs 10 pesos. A particular service that people need costs 50 pesos, whatever the situation might be. All of a sudden, a government comes to power in country A, this island country, which decides that it's going to become popular by increasing the money supply. People will have more money. So it issues an additional 1 million pesos, so there are now 2 million pesos in circulation. Everybody's wealthier, right? Everybody has twice as much money. And actually, for a while, people will feel richer. This is called the monetary illusion. Soon they will discover that gradually or not so gradually, the price of everything will rise in order to absorb the 2 million pesos. So what used to cost 10 pesos now costs 20. What used to cost 50 pesos now costs 100. That is inflation. Well, you say, so what? I mean, okay, so you're paying 20 pesos for the same thing that you used to pay 10 pesos for, but what difference does it make? As long as you've got the 20 when you used to have the 10. Well, that assumes all other things are equal, and all other things are very seldom equal. In the first place, people who have saved will find that their savings are cut in half. People who work for other people may find that the other people are not willing to increase their income twofold. Maybe they'll increase it by 20%. Maybe they'll increase it by 40%. But maybe they won't double it. In which case, you're worse off than you were before by a factor of 2 or 3. So there are winners and losers in inflation. Suppose you made a loan under the former system. You lent someone 1,000 pesos. So that person owes you 1,000 pesos plus interest. Now all of a sudden, this person can pay you back 1,000 pesos, which are worth 500 of the old pesos. But the contract simply says 1,000 pesos. So inflation is good for debtors and bad for creditors. It is good for spendthrifts and bad for savers. All of this is bad for the society as a whole because it is the savers and the investors, the producers, who are the bedrock of the economy. So people simply are no longer going to lend money as long as inflation continues. They are going to hoard money because they're afraid that in future it will be worth less. And if they lend money, they'll get it back at a deflated rate. So for society as a whole, inflation is very bad. It is, in fact, an extremely regressive tax. That is a tax that is paid more by poor people than rich people. Rich people can adjust to inflation much better than poor people can adjust to inflation. And regressive taxes obviously are, to that extent, unfair. And it's also a tax that is not something that is in a code, which you can look it up and you can say, well, this is what I owe, this is what I'm going to pay, or this other person is not paying what he's supposed to pay. It's something that is unpredictable and which affects people differently, but not in a predictable fashion. So it disrupts all of the basic interactions, interrelationships of people and organizations within society. Inflation is one of the most damaging phenomena that can take place from the economic standpoint within a given society. Now, inflation is usually measured as a percentage per annum. The inflation rate in France is 5% at this point. The inflation rate in India is 7%. The inflation rate in Argentina is 27%, or whatever it happens to be. Most countries run inflation most of the time. And if production increases, of course, there is no inflation. In other words, if this island country increased its production, doubled its production, and doubled its money supply, each peso would be worth the same amount as before. In fact, if the country did not issue another 1,000,000 pesos, you would have the opposite of inflation, which is deflation. Something that cost $10 before will now cost $5. Something which is something that is good for savers and very bad for debtors, for creditors. I'm sorry, for debtors. And in terms of deflation, is just as damaging to society as inflation, but is much less likely to take place because of the fact that all countries nowadays, almost all countries, have fiat currencies. In other words, currencies that are based only on the good faith and credit of the government issuing them. So you don't have that many cases of deflation in the modern world, in the contemporary world. You have many cases of inflation. It is an arbitrary figure, but it is generally accepted that when inflation goes above 50% per annum, that you have what is called hyperinflation. And this becomes even more damaging the higher it is. The higher the inflation, the more damaging it is. When you get into the situation of hyperinflation, as you had in Germany in the 1920s, as you had in Hungary in the 1950s, as you had in Zimbabwe in recent years, basically the economic system collapses. People have no idea what something is going to be worth tomorrow. They have to take a wheelbarrow full of paper money to buy a load of groceries. And the economic system reverts in many cases to what in effect is barter. Incidentally, somebody is responding to somebody else about the exam. I'm